G'day Grumpies, and welcome to another edition of Grumpy Old Bloke of the Vinyl Collection. Now today we're entering into the third phase of our David Bowie trilogy, I suppose you would call it, and this is the third box set of David's career, new career in town, and this contains some of the more, shall we say, challenging for some people. For me, some of the most artistic and creative periods for David Bowie, predominantly the Berlin years, even though, to be fair, the first one was recorded in France. However, we shall kick off with the new career in town David Bowie box set, and let's open it up, have a look through, and see what we can find. January 1977 saw the release of David Bowie's 11th studio album. That album was Low. Low is an interesting one. Very different from anything David had done before. This is nothing like the glam stuff, nothing like the fake plastic soul stuff that he did. This is very avant-garde, experimental, very influenced by the German bands such as Kraftwerk and Neue, Tangerine Dream, those sorts of bands. Track listing there for you. This is a remaster of the original album, beautifully produced. I reckon it sounds great. There's been some people who reckon it doesn't sound so cool, but yeah, I reckon it's pretty good. In a sleeve, yeah, a little bit of background to this album for you. David had moved, well, most of this album was recorded in France, to be fair, but it sort of coincided with his move to Berlin, where he'd been working with his friend Iggy Pop for some time, both of whom were trying to get clean. It helped Iggy record The Idiot, which was Iggy's first solo effort post Stooges, and David had an awful lot to do with the co-writing and production on that album. David also recorded Low at that time, and he actually didn't want Low to come out immediately after The Idiot because he didn't want people thinking that he'd been influenced by Iggy, the fact that it was sort of all one work together. However, the record company, once they received the recordings for this, absolutely hated it. They wrote back to David, refused it, and said, can we have something more like Young Americans or Station to Station? To which David, in inimitable style, said, no. So he stuck with it, and such that they actually delayed the release of this, I think, for something like 3 months. So it was originally supposed to come out around about October the previous year, but it came out just after David's birthday in '77. This album is extremely influential. Now, many of you will find this difficult to listen to. I do too, to be completely fair, but I love the fact that you can hear this album coming up many, many years later. Very influential on the post-punk period. Now, most people have heard the fact that Joy Division were extremely influenced by that album. That's really obvious, and as such, that whole period of post-punk, who else am I trying to think of? Human League, that sort of bands. But I would also argue, even later than that, bands like Radiohead were also influenced by that, certainly in the Kid A period. So it's that sort of ambient, challenging, electronica style-y music. I personally like it. It's really difficult for some people, so if you like the poppy, rocky sort of David Bowie stuff, yeah, it's probably not going to be your thing. But for people who sort of have an interest in that post-punk, depressive times before shoegazing became an art, I'd recommend you give it a go. Also in this album comes a David Bowie fan club membership application with the opportunity to buy all of his back catalogue from the record label. Isn't that kind of them? The label itself, I believe, although I haven't done my homework yet, I believe this is one of the last RCA recordings that David did officially. So, Low, very influential, very important album, a little bit difficult to listen to. This particular version of it is really well recorded, and I think it sounds great. 1977 saw the release of David's 12th studio album, Heroes. This is a 2017 remaster, also from the box set. This is the second of the Berlin trilogy. For me, this one's probably more approachable than Low, although Low was more groundbreaking because it was the first. This is in a similar vein, but a little bit more approachable. As far as the track listing and band listing is concerned, on the back, Heroes, of course, is the track that, if you don't know it, then well, I'm surprised you're even watching this show, to be honest with you. Brian Eno has far more of a presence on this album than he did on the first one, and also we have the addition of Robert Fripp on this album, who's an extremely well-known musician. I'm sure most of you would have heard of Rob Fripp. Also, Alamar is still a guitarist on this album, which has been with David for the last few albums actually, so he's one of the consistent players on this album. What can I say about it other than it's an iconic album, extremely influential, not to everybody's taste, but the track Heroes itself is worth buying this album for. It's been covered by many people. I'm sure you've heard numerous covers of it. Actually, one of the best covers of Heroes I have heard is by Motorhead. Go figure. The inner cover, or inner support, is your usual lyrics for the songs on the back there. David, quite interestingly, was touring during 1977, 1978, predominantly with Iggy Pop. He did tour this album, the next album, and a solo artist, but he actually supported Iggy Pop on I think it was the Idiot tour, as a keyboard player, and really didn't step into the light and take any lead vocals or anything like that. That'd been quite a big tour, you would imagine, going to see Iggy Pop and finding someone like David Bowie just in support cast. But hey, nonetheless, fantastic. What else have we got? Again, on the same label, it's the RCA Rip-Off Bowie cover. As I said, very influential album, a little bit more approachable than Low. Other than that, very much in a similar vein. This of the trilogy also was the only one entirely recorded, albeit sporadically, in Berlin. The next piece of vinyl in this collection is an EP. It's the Heroes EP. Side A is in German, side B is in French. You said one or the other way around. Yeah, I was right first time. German and French versions of Heroes. There are hundreds of versions of Heroes. I'm sure you all know it's probably David's most famous track. Probably my favourite track by Bowie, to be honest. Oh no, that's probably not fair to say that at all. It's a 12-inch EP, 2 tracks per side. Again on the Bowie sort of label. I don't know what you would call that, but beige. On a beige label. Nice to have, good part of the collection. Certainly not a must-have, but I'm surprised this wasn't included on the Recall album, which comes as part of all of the David Bowie box sets, but maybe it was just a lack of space on the album, or I don't know what the thinking was, but anyway, nice to have. Once again in this box set we're treated with 2 versions of the same album. In this case it's the live album, David Live, which is the second official David Bowie live album, released in September 1978. There are 2 versions of this. This is the original mix, and comes in double vinyl. The other album, which you'll have a squiz at the moment, is a triple album, and has been remastered to include some extra songs, which will more accurately represent the gig at the time, or the track listing at the time. So, a little bonus on this one. First of all, it's a gatefold sleeve. We love a gatefold, but it's not a very interesting one, I have to say. Track listing on the back, as one might normally get. Excuse me. Hopefully it's not, thing. The other really interesting thing about this, it comes on yellow vinyl. Now, I know it's not a purist thing, but I do love coloured vinyl. Coloured vinyl and picture discs, love them. Picture discs, I must admit, quality's not good, but do you know what? I reckon coloured vinyl, especially today, is fine. The quality of it is great. The band members on this include Carlos Alomar, who's still playing with them. I think Adrian Belew's playing on this as well. Yes, he is. Adrian Belew and a few other musicians that have been playing with David for quite some time. This was recorded over about 3 or 4 nights and in a couple of venues. Now, I'm a bit of a fan of the pure live album, which is 1 take, 1 gig, 1 night, complete with mistakes, no overdubs. I know, a little bit too much to ask for. The criticism of this album, when it was first released, has actually sounded too good. The reason was they were taking live feeds from the amplifier straight into the sound mixing board, and they'd also mixed down the sound of the crowd, so it didn't sound that much like a live album. Allegedly, I'm absolutely rubbish. I don't know what people are talking about. Has anyone actually seen Rush live? It's like listening to an album live. Absolutely fantastic. So anyway, that's the 2-disc version. The 3-disc version, the remastered version, is this one. It says, so I know on the front, 2017 copy. As you can see, the track list is a little bit more extended. This, as I said, is a triple album. Now, these are nightmarish to handle, as I'm sure you are aware. But that's the inside. Close it down, which is the same as the inner sleeve on the double album, and the back cover there. The actual albums are in black on this one, so not quite as exciting. Most of the tracks they played on this tour were from the Berlin trilogy, essentially from Low and from Heroes. Also there's a little bit of Ziggy on here as well. I think there's 3 or 4 tracks from the earlier albums as well. It doesn't really sit coherently together. They're a little bit jarring because there's such different styles of music, but then I guess if you're a fan, you go and see a band live to hear all its music from all its different phases. The inner covers from the triple album are essentially all just pictures of David, with the track listings on the back. That's that one. There you go. And finally, once again, all of the albums come with the orange Bowie label. There we are. There are 2 versions of Stage. Which version do I prefer? Probably the expanded version, the 2017 remix. It's got a great sound on it to start with, but having the extra tracks on there as well, I find less jarring, interestingly enough, because there are more tracks. Rather, there's a bit more of a journey rather than the Berlin period, glam period. It's sort of smooth. It seems to be smoother in transition. For some obscure reason, in all of these box sets, they do insist on giving you 2 versions of the same album, which I suppose is okay, but it does seem like a bit of a cheap way round. Surely they could have found something a little bit more unique. But anyway, this album we have 2 versions of Roger. I know this one's always confused me when I'm trying to pick one. We have 2 versions of this. We have the original version, and we have the remix version. Both look quite similar, but have their subtle differences. So here we go. I'll take that out for a second. This is, I believe, the original. This is the inner sheet here. Now, apparently the boys were never really happy with the boys being David and Tony Visconti were never really happy with the sound on this album, and they often talked about remixing it, which is what Visconti was doing just prior to David's death. David did hear some of the tracks remixed, and they had his approval. This is the other version of it. It's slightly, obviously, different on the inside, and the outer cover is just inverted, slightly yellowed as well. I don't know what the thinking behind that was. And have the colour version of the lyric sheet inside that as well. What about this album? Now, this one was the 3rd of the trilogy, as we like to think about it, although technically not part of the trilogy because it was recorded in Montreux, not in Berlin. This is probably a little bit more commercially accessible, probably moving towards the poppy end of stuff again. I think it's the weakest of the 3. It's neither as avant-garde nor is it as experimental as the other 2. It's okay. It's a good album. I know in later years revisionists have come back to it and said it's one of Bowie's most underrated albums. That may be the case. It was recorded in the break just after the Isola tour, which Stage was based on, the live album Stage, and it was released, I believe, in the tail end. I tell you what, I'll look it up for you. Released on the 25th of May, there you go, 25th of May 1979, the end of another era, or almost. Well, finally we stumble into the 1980s. David's been an absolute phenomenon through the late 60s and early 70s, and now there's another decade of his career. For many people in the 1980s, this was probably one of the first signs of the 80s had actually hit. Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, David Bowie's 14th studio album to date, at least. Single album, single cover, the track listing on the back. Not that easy to read on here, but it does contain a number of hits that you'd be more than familiar with. What have you got? Scary Monsters and Supercrypts. Obviously the title track, which is a particular favourite of mine. Ashes to Ashes. And Fashion. Ashes to Ashes is essentially part 2 of Space Oddity and refers to Major Tom, who appeared way back then. I particularly like this album. I mean, it's 80s. This is I'll tell you how much I like this album. There's the original version of it. You see, I actually have an original version of it. I will continue going through the box set though, because that's what I'm here for. This is a reproduction of the inner sleeve with all the lyrics on there, as one might expect. And this really marks the end of the Berlin period. This is not one of those albums, although it does actually contain a number of the same musicians still on this album that were on the previous albums. I'm just having a look down here for you just to see if there's any names. I know Brian Eno was still involved with this album to some degree, but also appearing on this album was Pete Townsend, so a bit more of a rocky influence there. So really interesting. That's the band members on there. I particularly like this album. It's sort of restored my faith in David Bowie for a little bit, because, as I said, I have an interesting relationship with David Bowie, which is push-pull. He really interests me with some of his stuff, and then he pushes me away with some of his other stuff, and I've never really settled. I think that's why I've never been hardcore Bowie, because it's just too diverse. Whilst I respect musicians being diverse and trying different musical styles and everything else, sometimes if it's just done for the sake of it, I question the reason for it. By all means, expand and try different things and explore different areas, but not just for the sake of it. Do it because it means something to you. Don't play soul because you think you should. Don't play punk because you think you should. Play soul, play punk because it comes from here. That's where it needs to come from. And David, incredibly creative. What can you say? I mean, it's a great album, and one I would say would be in the must-have list. So out of the 14 albums so far, we've probably got 6 that I would say were essential in any record collector's collection, I guess. Just out of interest, I've pulled out the original album as well, just for comparison. The label on the one in the box set is the black version of the Bowie label. The original one I have over here, which feels incredibly light in comparison, is an RCA Victor. So the difference between the 180 remaster version and the original, this feels really flimsy in comparison, and whether or not that shows up on playback, I'll let you know when I listen to it. So as we draw this box set to a close, we have the Recall album. This one's called Recall 3, funnily enough, because this is the 3rd in the collection. Track listing on the back, and as per the others, it's a number of outtakes and single versions and B-sides and stuff that weren't available on any of the albums. Of particular interest on here is on side 4 you've got the Baal recordings, which was an EP which David wrote specifically for a Bertolt Brecht play, which has not seen the light of day before, I believe, not in its truest form anyway, not in a formal version. The other thing I would like to draw particular notice to is the fact that you've got Under Pressure on here, which is actually a Queen track, which David, well, you know the story, I'll go through that with you. That was released in 1983, so it's a little outside the span of recording of this particular box set, but nonetheless. Inner covers, there we are, and the other one there. The records themselves have a nice bright green Bowie RCA style label on them, and that pretty much draws the vinyl in this collection to a conclusion. So that only leaves, of course, the obligatory coffee table book. True to form, this is beautifully produced, as one has come to expect from all of these box sets. Is beautiful. The quality of the content is incredibly good. A little bit on each of the albums, a little bit of the style about the recording, where its head was, about that transition, and there you go. So I'm sure it's an absolutely beautiful book, as they all are. Some would say they're worth the purchase price of the box sets alone. I'd argue against that amount of money towards any of this. So again, for the reason I bought this box set, as I've already said, is because I didn't have, well, I had a couple of Bowie albums, but I didn't have the complete set, and I felt that I needed it up until a certain point. These box sets came out at a time when I was in a good position financially. I could afford to do it. I pre-ordered them all, so I didn't know what the contents was going to be until they arrived. And this is number 3 of the first 3. There are, I believe, 2, maybe even 3 more David Bowie box sets which continue on from A New Career in Town, which again, as I've mentioned, finishes in 1980, technically 1982. However, at this point where David Bowie loses me, once he called upon us all to put on our red shoes and dance the blues or something along those lines, and China Girl, David Bowie completely lost me at that point. So admire him hugely, incredible influence, everything you need to say about David Bowie, for me, lost me then. No interest since. And also that incredibly embarrassing Dancing in the Streets with Mick Jagger. I know it was for charity, just as bloody well. I think it's a shame that David sort of seemed to lose his way and got caught up in his own commercialism and his own diversity and whatever else you want to call it. But for me, musically, there's nothing after 1982 that really calls me, apart from one thing. And we'll do this as a little bonus on the end of this episode. I do have copies of Black Star and Lazarus No Plan EP. I have copies of this. This is the limited edition with the day glow thing. I'll get it out for you. Let me spoil you. I haven't got this out for a long time. I'm sure you're all aware that it comes in as a double album, single presentation. Sorry, in a gatefold sleeve. There's the booklet comes inside it. What else do we have? And the actual sleeve itself was that textured star design, which glows in the dark, I'm led to believe. As far as the vinyl's concerned, it's a standard black vinyl. Here we go. I bought Black Star when it was released. Well, not the very day it was released for obvious reasons, because you can get hold of it anywhere. But I bought it basically for reminiscing. I have to say, I got caught up in the whole emotion of David's death, which was 8 years ago now. Wow, that flew by. But I got a bit caught up in the emotion of it and went out and bought Black Star. I was right. I should have stopped in 1982. Still not a big fan of this album. It interests me the amount of critical acclaim this album gets. I wonder if it would have got it had circumstances been slightly different. Not dissing Dave. Incredible musician. Just not to my taste after that. So, there you go. That's the David Bowie collection that I have here. I hope you've enjoyed going through the box sets with me. It's certainly been good for me to go through them all again, because I don't think I'd looked at them since I purchased them. And it's been good to reminisce, and now I'm going to go back and listen to probably my favourite albums by David Bowie, which we've already discussed, most of which came out in the first 10 years of his career. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. That concludes the B section of my record collection today. Anyway, I said looking up to my right just in case I've missed something. So we're moving on to C next. So I hope you'll all join me soon. Keep on rocking. Stay grumpy. If you could subscribe and like downstairs, I'd really appreciate that. Of course, as ever, and any comments welcome, and positive or negative. Take care of yourselves. Stay grumpy. See you soon. Ciao.